In this video, we're going to build a walnut skee-ball table, take a trip to Chuck E. Cheese to research launch angles, take plenty of practice shots, use the shaper origin to cut some holes, and pour some epoxy. Enjoy the build. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. A friend of mine came to me recently. He wanted to build a skee-ball table, something that was full size that he could put in his gym that he was opening up. Wanted something that everybody could play, the kids, the adults, something that would hold up to the wear and tear of being in a commercial gym. You can see me in these shots using my iPad. The program I have up is Shaper 3D. Makes it super easy to design furniture or any other projects to scale. That helps me get my cut list, figure out exactly how much material I need to buy. That way I can maximize the material and be left with as minimal waste as possible. What you've seen so far is us laying out a template based on the CAD drawings in Shaper 3D and using a Festool track saw to cut out those templates before transferring those templates over to the plywood and then cutting the plywood out, again using the Festool track saw. Because of the side panels being constructed of double thick plywood and also the hardwood that's going to be involved in this, we wanted to make this as mobile as possible, so we constructed it in two different boxes. So right now you see the glue up of the side panels that will hold the runway, and then you'll also see the side panels that will construct the box that holds the scoring holes at the rear of the skee-ball table that the ball flies into. And we'll be able to separate those two boxes for transport and then put them back together when it gets to its final destination. We wanted two different types of plywood for this build. The inside of the boxes is an alder veneer plywood. That's the lighter shade here. And that's going to be sandwiched up against the walnut veneered plywood that will make up the outside of the box. You can see us here sandwiching the inner alder plywood to the outer walnut plywood using glue, countersunk screws that will never be seen. Those will be at the bottom of the table where the ball shoot return is, so you'll never see them. You saw in that clip how we were able to suction those two pieces of plywood together. It's because we used the Lamello Zeta P2 with the Tenso connectors. It's essentially a tool that creates a biscuit cut in the wood. Then you slip in these male and female black connectors that connect together, act as a clamp until your glue can dry. And here you see me using the Domino XL with a 14 cutter to nail in some dominoes. And this is where the two boxes will join together so that we can connect it after we transport it. All right, now we're on to constructing the alleyway for the table. We're using alder for the outsides of the lane with a walnut accent piece up the middle. We went with actual hardwood for the lane versus plywood, just because it's going to need to hold up to the wear and tear of all the balls bouncing off of it. This ended up being 22 inches wide, which is about 4 inches wider than the official skee-ball tables at Chuck E. Cheese, which you'll see later in the video. While we go through some boring table saw footage, I just want to thank you for watching the video. This is my first YouTube video. I typically make custom furniture and plan on posting videos in the future to this channel. I also have an Instagram page if you want to check that out under Forged in Walnut. Again, thank you for watching and hit that subscribe button for future content. Now on to Chuck E. Cheese. This is me using my Wixie table saw angle finder at the local Chuck E. Cheese to figure out the exact angle for their ramp. Came up with about 60 degrees at the center part of the ramp and used blue painter's tape to scribe out the exact shape of the ramp on their skee-ball table. This is probably the most critical part of the build to make sure the trajectory of the balls flying off the table into the holes is correct. I took what I learned from Chuck E. Cheese, brought it back to the shop, transferred those angles and scribe marks over to some MDF, and started making some templates and a form with that exact curve angle so that I can start building my ramp off of that using bendy plywood. I cut out the template using the bandsaw, then test fitted some pieces of 1/4 inch bendy ply to make sure that it will wrap around the template. Here I used the oscillating sander to smooth out the angle on the form, and then separated the MDF blocks and set them up against a piece of plywood to start building the form. Put more blocks towards the middle, since that's probably the part of the ramp that's going to see the most use. Here I'm just nailing together the plywood to the MDF to build that form out. I used the bandsaw to trim off the top of the form. I decided to go with a shorter ramp versus the longer ramp that Chuck E. Cheese had. And then just test fitting some bendy ply scraps to make sure it's going to conform to that form. With this bendy ply, you got to loosen it up, make sure it'll bend the way you want to, and here I'm test fitting with some squeeze clamps to make sure it's going to work when I go to glue it all together. This glue up went pretty smooth, just a little bit of glue, a lot of squeeze clamps, just making sure everything was even on both sides and the bendy ply was up against the form best we could. By having the form shorter and not as tall as the Chuck E. Cheese ramp, we were able to use the squeeze clamps to clamp the top part of the form. We set the ramp aside for the time being to dry and began working on the ball return ramp, which is below the alleyway of the Skeeball table. This is also the bottom of the casing that will hold the box together. Here we tried to use as much plywood as we could so we didn't have scraps. So you see us joining a piece of walnut and a piece of alder side by side because we had those left over. You'll never see that part. It'll be covered by the alleyway that's right above it. Here we're tacking on and screwing in some cleats to the side rails. And we're going to be setting on that ball return onto these cleats to join the two sides together. You can see the last 6 inches or so of this ball return alley is walnut plywood. That's the part you will see when you grab your balls from the table. Here we're cutting down the ramp after it's all glued up to make all the edges flush so that we can start joining it to the alleyway. Cut off the back of the ramp that's no longer needed for the form. Now we started to see if this thing actually worked. We dry fit the alleyway to the ramp, started making some practice throws to make sure that launch angle was working out good, and it was. Sanded down the alley a bit, and we're going to start joining the ramp to the actual alleyway. For this, we just chose to do some pocket holes on the underside that you'll never see. This is the underside of the ramp, marking out some layout lines for the domino to help with alignment. And then attaching that ramp to the alleyway with dominoes, pocket holes, and some glue. Now we're going to start building the rear carcass box for the scoring area. Here we're just using as much leftover plywood as we can from that original 4 sheets. That's why you see the mismatched plywood for the bottom, but this will be hidden and never seen. We use pretty much every connector to get this rear box together. We got pocket holes, tensos, some dominoes, some glue, and some clamps. We just wanted to get this thing glued up and together as fast as possible so we could keep working on it without having to wait for glue to dry and clamps. Next, we use the track saw to cut the alleyway to size and a 1/4 inch roundover on the end of the alleyway. And this is going to be where your hand goes to retrieve the balls, so we want to make sure that was softened a bit. We dry fit the alleyway on top of some cleats. Tested out the ball return, make sure you can grab them, and of course another practice throw. Since all that dry fitting worked, we're now attaching the cleats to the sides to hold the alleyway. You can see us removing some spacer blocks that were just slightly over 3 inches, since the wood balls that we're using for the Skeeball table were 3 inches in diameter. And that allowed enough space for the balls to roll down the return alley underneath the upper alley. And the balls we're using were purchased off Amazon. I believe it came in a pack of 6 for $25. Now we're back to the rear box. We're going to attach some cleats on the lower part of the box, and that holds a 1/4 inch piece of walnut plywood at a slight angle, and that plywood's going to accept the balls after they drop through the holes of the scoreboard. And because it's at an angle, the balls will bounce off that board, roll down the slope, onto the return alley, and back to the start of the board. Here we're putting in a piece of 3/4 inch ply just to test fit it, and that will end up being the whole board. And then just dry fitting a piece of 1/4 inch ply to the rear box to enclose it all. Now it's over to the Shaper Origin to cut out the holes on the scoreboard. The Shaper Origin's a handheld CNC router that uses this domino tape that I'm laying out to create a path to cut out the file you upload into the router. It's another amazing tool. Sometimes with this router, you gotta create jigs, which you can see the lighter piece of plywood up there with domino tape on it is a jig, just so that the router has tape to read when I'm cutting out the top part of the board. While I was at Chuck E. Cheese, I measured out the holes, which are just slightly bigger than 3 inches, I think 3 1/4, to allow the balls to fall through. And then you can see these grooves that I'm cutting out about 1/2 inch deep, and that will accept the rubber bumpers for the scoring areas. And each scoring area is a different size based on the official Skeeball rules. And here's a close-up of those grooves that the rubber bumpers will go into. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this Skeeball is going into a gym. So we routed out the company logo, filled it in with some black epoxy, and then also poured some black epoxy down the ramp, and using a heat gun to kind of thin it out and spread it out. Looks pretty messy at this point, but the final product turns out great. We wanted to pour some epoxy on the ramp because it's gonna really take a beating, and we wanted it to last. So having that epoxy on the outside will hold up to those balls hitting it. Next, we're on to covering up that exposed plywood on the carcass of the Skeeball table. We're using walnut hardwood. This will act as a good surface for the rails and hold up to some damage and people grabbing it all the time. So we're using the Rockler rubber band clamps, some brad nails, and some glue just to get these things into place. Again, this isn't custom furniture, it's a game table going in a gym, so not super concerned about the joinery. We're just kind of doing it down and dirty here. We just went piece by piece here, marking out the angles, taking it back to the miter saw, cutting them, dry fitting them, and then using glue and brad nails to tack them into place. You can see there's a slight overhang on the sides of the rails. Decided to leave that, but we'll come back over it later with a round over bit and some sandpaper to ease the edges. Once these rails are going on, you can kind of really see it coming together. You can see the whole board in the back there with some rubber bumpers dry fit. Now we're on to finish. Use the Fuji Mini Mite 4 to spray on some polyacrylic. Sanding in between coats, we ended up with 3 coats total. And here we're building out the bumpers for the scoring circles. We had to get creative with this and ended up using rubber baseboard. We took 2 pieces, glued them together to kind of thicken it up, We did some quick math to figure out exactly how long each bumper strip needed to be to fit into the circumference of these grooves that we cut out with the origin. Once we had that figured out, we drilled a couple holes in each end and used metal zip ties to attach it together. And then ultimately we used epoxy to fill those grooves and wedge the rubber bumpers into them to hold secure. Now I'm spraying on some spray adhesive to that plywood that's below the whole board, and then also to a piece of 1/4 inch foam, which goes right on top of the plywood and then rolled on there, and that'll dampen the blow from those balls hitting it after they fall through the holes. So it wouldn't be Skeeball without a scoreboard. We purchased some laser sensors that go on the underside of the whole board, so when the ball drops through the hole, it triggers the sensor, which goes into the computer and then displays it on this green scoreboard, which we enclose inside a box with a plexiglass front. And this will hang in the upper rear part of the rear box attached to this stretcher here on the back. And having it enclosed will protect it against any damage the balls will cause to it. Now we got it all dry fit together. Another practice throw, and I think a 40 pointer. Now I'm just cleaning up some loose ends, attaching a piece to the rear of the ramp to enclose that. For the legs, we're keeping it super simple. Just some construction 4x4s milled up, cut down to 13 inches, with a piece of plywood across the two of them, spray painted black, and then attached to the bottom. Super simple. This is the final touches on the rear carcass. Attaching the legs, we did 2 pairs of legs on each section, so 4 pairs total. We dropped in the alleyway and glued it to those stretchers, and now it's time for delivery. You can see how it's in 2 different pieces. They attach together, and then I'm just putting on a little strip piece of walnut to cover up that seam. And it's already getting some use. We added on some rubber bumpers to protect the sidewalls, and that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching till the end. Subscribe for future content. Check out my Instagram, and thanks again.